The White House says Biden's upcoming physical will not include a cognitive exam. Roll tape.
We're going to continue to focus on what this president has been able to get done, obviously on his physical, which is the president proves every day how he operates, how he thinks, right? But by dealing with world leaders, by making really difficult decisions on behalf of the American people, whether it's domestic, whether it's national security. And so he shows it every day on how he thinks, how he operates. And so that is how the Dr. O'Connor sees it, and that's how I'm going to leave it.
Former Governor of Arkansas, Mike Huckabee, joins me now. Governor, can the White House, the president, can they ever get the cognitive problem behind them?
Not as long as Joe Biden goes out and says anything. Not as long as he shuffles to and from every podium he goes to, or the Marine One base. I mean, this is a tragic situation. And Karine Jean-Pierre goes to the podium and she says, everyone can see this president. And Karine, that's the problem. We can. We're not stupid. And we can see that when he gets off the teleprompter, he's totally lost. And even on the teleprompter, he can't get through the end of the sentence, and he mumbles through it. So there's no way they're going to do a cognitive test and release that.
Can he be forced to?
Devastating. What's that?
Can you force a cognitive test? Is there any way to do that?
No, I don't think so. You can't insist that the President of the United States take a test that everybody gets to see. But the reason they're not going to give him that test, and certainly not going to release the results, is because they know what the results are going to be. If they knew that he was as sharp as Karine said he was, they would rush him right now into a cognitive test and have a press conference and say, here it is, folks. This guy is fit as a fiddle. But his strings are loose. He can't make a tune. And that's the real challenge that the White House faces, but it's a bigger challenge that the country faces.
Vice President Harris says she is ready to serve, her words, ready to serve, following voters' concerns over Biden's mental fitness. Kamala Harris has lower approval numbers than Biden. This is a real Democrat dilemma. And, Frank, I can't see a way out of this.
Well, there's not one, because being the first black woman as vice president makes it real touchy for a party that puts everything on the way things look and on virtue signaling. They can't afford to drop her right now unless they find another black woman to replace her. But her approval numbers, I would say they're in the toilet, but that's a compliment to where they are. And the worst part of it is that she's not much better at the podium. Her cognitive abilities, maybe it's not a matter of not being able, but other than going through Venn diagrams, she comes with nothing. And it's not like she's done a bang-up job down at the border where she was assigned to oversee it. That's been a disaster. So they're in a real world of hurt right now, and I think they're beginning to see it.
I just feel it's rather difficult to cover this subject. One doesn't like to say that the President of the United States is in cognitive decline. One doesn't want to say that the Vice President, who would take over from him, is not in a position to take over from him and couldn't do the job. This is a sad situation and difficult to report on. Last word to you.
Well, I think it's important to remember, it's not his age. People keep talking about age. It's not his age. Clint Eastwood is sharp, still making movies in his 90s. There are a lot of people who are older than Joe Biden. It's not about how chronologically old he is. It's whether he's competent and capable of doing the job. And more the evidence says he simply is not.
Governor, thanks very much for being with us today. Difficult subject, but you covered it well. We appreciate that. Thank you very much, sir.